What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
And on this episode of Educate Everyone, we continue our conversation with Dr. Yong Zhao. He is a Foundation Distinguished Professor at the University of Kansas, known internationally for his work on the future of education, globalization, and technology. He's authored over 30 books and holds appointments in the U.S., Australia, the UK, and China. Dr. Zhao earned his Ph.D. in educational psychology from the University of Illinois. Here's Dr. Joseph Atman and Dr. Zhao.
We are always needing to find out what it is that students really want to do and who they want to become. And that's one of education's jobs that we really don't focus on, is giving those students perspective on where they fit into the world, not just what their test scores are, not what their class ranks are, but where do they really fit? What's their part within this whole story that we're all playing and living out? And I think that that's something that education fails miserably in. And I think that it's one of the major reasons why people are disinterested in the process in general of education, in the way that we've been doing it for a long, long time now.
Well, absolutely. I think right now, if you look at our society, there's so many people who have graduated from our education system. They don't really have a purpose. They don't have a life. They're miserable. They're depressed. They're anxious. They're seeking professional psychological help. We're doing the same thing to our kids. If you're not doing anything meaningful, doing anything for a purpose, your psychological, social, emotional conditions are not going to become great. So finding and solving problems for others and for the world is giving back the meaning, the purpose to learning. So you learn for a purpose. You just don't learn for learner's sake. So I think from what you're describing, Middletree, or what we are trying to do, is trying to help children to learn for a reason, to connect themselves to other people. And only when you are using your unique greatness, your value to serve others, you feel genuinely happy. So this is why now schools, for example, they're teaching social and emotional skills, SEL. I think that's a huge mistake. You're just making it more and more meaningless. What we need to do is help people identify problems, solve them, because schools now, teaches existing answers to existing questions, and they just assess how much you memorize that.
And I totally agree with everything that you just said there. If people who listen to this are involved in education, everybody knows what socio-emotional learning is, but there are some that don't. So can you talk to us about it? Because here's why I'm stopping us on this. It has become a huge, and I mean huge, thing within education to focus on socio-emotional learning. We work with a lot of districts. It is central to their curriculum, and it's central to what they want us to do. So I need you to talk to us about that.
I just wrote a book. The book will be published. It's called Fix the Past or Invent the Future. It will come out soon by ASCD, maybe in 2 months. Like SEL is basically trying to fix the past. It does not work. I have a huge chapter on that. Actually, I examined the literature. SEL, in essence, has become popular in schools, not really because it has any good evidence to say how good it is. It's because really the educational law changed from No Child Left Behind, and many states, many schools said, We need another kind of accountability in reporting to the federal government besides test scores. It's an organization outside of Chicago that's been pushing it. I think a lot of states have SEL standards. A lot of schools are doing SEL training. It really has practically no meaning and no result. I always joke about it. It's supposed to make children socially and emotionally more better, but I think it's adding more kind of anxiety to them. And the school's problem is that children not doing meaningful work is not because they lacked SEL training. SEL training sometimes can be actually honest racist, because, people have different ways to manage emotions. People have different cultures, may have different definitions of what's good emotion is. It is human beings needs autonomy. Human beings needs purpose. So that's what I'm arguing. But if people are interested in, can read my book, Fix the Past or Invent the Future.
That is a great title. It sort of already points the audience to where you're going with that. But again, because SEL has not become, in my viewpoint, it's not become popular. It's become required.
That's exactly the problem, right?
Right. It's not popular. It's not like a trend. It is absolutely the standard at this point. And again, we write proposals and we work with all these different districts, and we are happy to do whatever it is that they ask of us.
Remember, Joe, we're talking about early on, education is political. This is one of those political things.
There you go. So can you explain to everyone what SEL is, what its intention was precisely, and again, why you don't think it's a great thing per se, but can you sort of sum all of that up?
Basically, SEL, different schools, they do differently. They have 5 different competencies. They try to help children moderate their own behavior and manage their emotions. And, none of it is actually exactly wrong. But the evidence just shows it does not work. Some schools do teacher training, make sure teachers know how to manage that. Some schools even have specific courses for students to be more aware of what they think, how they feel. I think its overall idea is to focus on your social and emotional capabilities in schools. And we want add that as part of learning. Learning, honestly, has always been social and emotional, right? You cannot learn without that. But adding them as new requirements, new standards, takes time away to train teachers. I just think it's not effective. Maybe some children need it, but definitely not all from the evidence. The educational evidence I've gathered, again, in my book, it shows it's not that effective for everybody.
Can you give us a sneak peek of what the evidence is and how you gathered that?
Well, the evidence is mixed. It's like if people always talk about effect size. I don't know how well your audience knows those statistical terms. Effect size, for example, you might get effect size of 0.2. 0.2 is not that great. You may get 1. 1 is much bigger. 0.2, maybe you get, if you have 30 kids, you might get 10 kids might have benefited greatly, and another 10 might have no impact. Another 10 might have got hurt by this whole thing. It's a very complicated way to gather data, but there's a lot of new meta-analysis coming out to show even SEL proponents, their data would not say, this is overwhelmingly great. Yeah, but there's a lot of writing about it. So it's like a political movement.
Right, and it is such a new thing that I think it's kind of very raw for everyone. And again, it's beyond a trend. It is, as I mentioned, core and central to what districts are asking their providers
it's
to
a lazy
implement.
political movement because you can get something out of it. You get grants, you get support. It's a lazy educational approach. You need to think a lot more deeper. If, like you and I were talking about, if you get kids involved in meaningful, purposeful work in school, their social-emotional problems will drastically reduce.
And as you also mentioned, education itself, or the whole process of being within the current of a school system and a school day and all that, there is socio-emotional learning that just happens naturally throughout that. It has to happen. I think the whole point like so many things that the educational system attempts to do. I think it's very well intended. We've not collected any data on it necessarily. And that's not actually, we do surveys and we talk to students using SEL parameters on that, but we've not made that a focus on what we do. Again, as a provider for districts, we accommodate to whatever their standards are for us in terms of SEL or anything else. And I shouldn't say that we haven't implemented it. I mean, we certainly have, but it does kind of happen naturally. And in the way that we're structured, it happens very, very organically, given that, like you had mentioned before, we group students based on not their age per se. It's a wider age grouping, but really their competency and their academic prowess and capacity is generally where our groupings come from when we work with them. But again, I think SEL is well intended, potentially not executed in the proper ways or the way it was intended or hoped its efficacy would show. But myself, I don't really have any data proving that one way or another.
Education likes to follow fads. Another popular thing I'm sure you've encountered is called growth mindset. That's a really interesting concept. Yep. Carol Dweck out of Stanford, people say you got to have a growth mindset. But actually, sometimes you need to learn to give up. Growth mindset can be simple stupidity. You're simply stupid and stubborn. There's no point for you to stick to something always. So you have to have smart growth mindset. There's a lot of concepts like this. I don't know, there's a lot of different data. It's just like a good medicine. There's no medicine without side effects. There's no free lunch in a sense that you got to think, it works for somebody, may not work for others.
Absolutely. And again, this kind of goes back to something we were saying before about the educational system as it is currently structured, just tries to cater to the largest majority. It is a one-size-fits-all model when that really isn't the best way to educate anybody. And we all kind of know that, and yet no one seems to have an idea about how to fix it, per se. So now you were talking before about how to reorganize and group students and potentially do that using AI. What would that look like? How would we reorganize students to get the most out of them? And really that would seem to help teachers also, right? So you've got, and this kind of works with honors classes or AP classes, maybe not AP classes as much because now everybody just wants to take AP classes even if they're not maybe necessarily ready for them. But it used to be when I was going to school, there was a lot of honors classes. That is, the accelerated classes. I wasn't in a lot of them, mind you. I was in one of them. But those seemed to hum along at a different clip because they were calibrated to a certain degree or capacity of student. So how would you ideally want to reorganize students and what form would that take? How would you do that?
Well, I think first of all, we need to determine an approach. They always try to change the entire school. Recently, I've been running a different experiment called school within a school. I think schools need to diversify their offerings. There's no need to convince every teacher, every student, every parent to change. I think schools should change within their own capacity. At University of Kansas, we have a new center called Center for Reimagining Education. We're working with schools, so we said, okay, we do not want to change your entire school. I don't think schools, which serve as a monopoly for a community, should diversify because you have the different parents and different teachers. So the approach is starting small, starting with willing students, voluntary teachers and parents. And then the second thing, we want teachers or students or parents to propose transformative changes. Transformative means drastically different from others. We believe teachers, parents, and students and school leaders are able to come up with better solutions, better problems, to address the change. So we want them to propose and work with them to make the change. And the third one is we want to make sure their changes are visible to others. So hopefully that can expand. We've tried this actually over the last 10 years, actually, in Australia, in Victoria, New South Wales, Western Perth, in South Australia. We've tried that in schools in the US, tried that in schools in China. And I think it works very well. And the specific change we want to emphasize are really those three things: personalized learning, pedagogies to starting from finding solving problems. Purpose is about building human interdependence based on solving problems for other people.
So how come, if it's been successful, is it not been adopted just because, like we spoke about before, the whole giant engine and machine of the educational system is just something that is really, really slow to change and move?
I'm not sure any change can truly be adopted fast. If you look at schools today, I'm sure you work with a lot of schools. Schools always are engaged in changes, but without being different, right? You got new superintendent, new school boards, and new principal.
Right.
I want to change. I want to make this. But most of those changes, what I would call, are changes without being different, because the difference has to do with recognize individual differences. And for schools to accept, recognize, and endorse students' individual differences is extremely difficult, because some parents want to compare. Schools cannot compare and should not compare students with each other, but parents like that. We like the ranking. We want our children to be top 5%, which is very difficult. Another thing is that the kind of change I propose can preserve your tradition without affecting everybody else, but can also bring some unusual competition. How come you get involved in that? How come I don't?
Right,
So it's a different management issue. Since 1990s, some American schools tried school within a school, different models. Did not necessarily work, because every place you do, you need permission. American public school has a big problem is that we want to egalitarianism, right? You have a district has 5 elementary schools. All 5 schools have to be the same. Otherwise, parents feel they are treated differently.
Right.
So there's many, many issues. I remember back in the 1990s when schools were buying computers. So if you have only 5 computers, it might be more effective putting in one school. But now we have 5 schools. Each school has to have 1 computer,
Right.
So that egalitarianism might be many problems. If you want to, Joe, if you want to say, what are the problems we face in education? There are too many problems. What we need to change is individual courage. I think schools should have changed a long time ago, but why? There are too many reasons. But how do we make the change? I hope you will run into individual school leaders, teachers who can make the change. I've written actually a couple of books. We collect a lot of evidence. Individual teachers can make changes. Individual students can make changes. Individual school principals can make changes. Systems can make changes. Changes can be done by anyone, but that anyone needs courage, not necessarily permission.
So then the question is, if you're running for school board, if you're a teacher, if you're a student, what do you need to do? That courage that you talk about, because we're talking about radical changes here, not just change. We're talking about capital C change, almost really a tearing down of the current system in place of something new. But as you also mentioned, that's not possible.
There are a lot of changes that are significant, but not transformative. Like No Child Left Behind caused significant changes, but has not caused education to become better. Actually has made it worse. So let me give you an example. At the end of the summer camp in Beijing last week, we had 2 Australian students, high school students. They realized schools are not doing what they need. So they were going back. They're from Australia. They're going back to Australia to talk to their school. It's a private school. They want to demand 3 hours a week to give to students out of the curriculum. Students can determine what to do with that 3 hours. I think that's brave. That's a good change. Students can make that change. That's possible, right?
Yeah.
Teachers could make similar changes. We had another school from South Australia. Actually, their school principal came for 2 days. She was amazed at how this camp transformed the teachers and students. And then she's going back to allow the students and teachers to speak to the entire staff. They were running an experiment with our approach called the Human Interdependence Project for the last 2 years in that one class. Now she wants to expand to all incoming freshmen. That's change. So changes like that can happen. But I think someone needs to prompt that. Maybe after listening to this podcast, they say, yeah, that's change.
It's really interesting to hear somebody say all this, an expert, a professional, someone who's given their life to all of this. And I appreciate what you say about people need to have courage to be able to implement and instantiate that change. Because I think you're right that this is such a giant issue. There's so much change that needs to happen that it really almost does need to happen just one thing at a time, right? You're not going to knock down one domino and the whole thing's going to come crashing down. It probably most likely will happen with one person doing one thing that catches on. And like you said, education is big on trends. So maybe that will be that windfall that knocks down that first domino, and then they do all collapse at once. The successive chain there. That would be wonderful. But I think, as you mentioned, you do have to have a good amount of courage in order to implement that. And I think that administrators, school board members, superintendents, teachers themselves, they're all under such huge, vast, and great heavy pressure to do things that are just keeping themselves and their school, their district, whatever, afloat. And so they, I imagine, feel like they're too burdened by the day-to-day to work on or do anything that's outside the margins. So I think what you said about having to have courage is true, but they also have to have the passion, the time, and the energy to implement something different and meaningful.
Well, that's strategic. I co-authored a book a couple of years ago called Focused. Really, it's an educational leadership book. It's a strategy. I think school leaders, teachers, they really need to focus on a few things instead of trying to do everything. All our teachers, school leaders are overworked and they're dragged in 1,000 directions by all sorts of things. I think everyone needs to work again smart and to deal with things that only they can deal with. Let's not make changes that don't make difference. Let's make changes that matter. Because again, even though we say schools don't change, but schools actually implement all sorts of crazy things every year. But we need to ask, do they actually matter? Do they actually matter?
Well, Dr. Zhao, thank you so much for being on here. I really, really enjoyed and appreciated this conversation. I wish there were more educators out there who were focused on this like you are, and you're just doing great work. Please keep it up. And yes, let's please talk more again in the future that we reinvent.
Thank you. I will be happy to come back. Thank you, Joe, for your meaningful work and for this great conversation.
And now the Middle Tree Minute.
This is Kristen Hernandez, Middle Tree's executive assistant. Sometimes the best study buddy isn't another person. It's a stuffed animal. Encourage your student to explain their homework to a teddy bear, pet, or even a younger sibling. When they break it down step by step, they'll quickly discover what they truly understand and what's still confusing. This is because teaching forces the brain to reorganize knowledge in simple terms. It's silly, it's fun, and it works surprisingly well, especially for young learners who might resist traditional studying. And that's the Middle Tree Minute.
And now a quick look into Dr. Atman's book, A Philosophical War. Joe, on the last episode of Educate Everyone, we talked about why people never seem to be complacent where they are. They're always striving to do something more, be something more, become something more. And you gave us some good information on that, but it's really fascinating. And I think we should go a little deeper.
Again, it's a central kind of theme, not only to the work that I've put out there with A Philosophical War with this book, but it's really a central theme to all sorts of existential questions, and especially in that brand of philosophy called existentialism. One of the things that it really looks at is this question of why do human beings feel so disconnected to their own lives, to the world, just in general. It's something we've talked about in Educate Everyone in this segment. It's been completely thematic throughout these segments as well. So, but the reason for that is because it, again, kind of really points to a very large issue that sort of brews up within us all. Even though it kind of percolates under the surface and we aren't always truly aware of it. Part of the point, as I've also mentioned a number of times in these segments of this particular work, is performative. And even the title, A Philosophical War. We're at war with our own consciousness and our own being and the world that we encounter directly, right? Just our own lives. We seem to be at odds with it. And so that title is performative. This exploration is also performative. And just like any performance, it sort of calls attention to something that may very well be right there. And yet it's so saturated within our lives. We sometimes kind of need a little bit of a performance. We sometimes kind of need something like an art form or someone to call it out to us to shock us back into its awareness and reality. So that's just sort of the point of all this. And that's why this has been so thematic throughout these segments and throughout the beginning of this work in A Philosophical War. But just to get back to all the actual question of why do we feel this disconnection and why do we feel like we have to move forward constantly and are never, as you said, we're never just satisfied and complacent about our current station, generally speaking. And again, as we mentioned last time, that can be a really great impetus for change and for striving to become more and go and be beyond where we currently are and to evolve and to grow and all of that. But then that begs the question, well, why do we need to evolve? Why do we need to grow? Why do we feel this need to become more? Why do we not feel like we are already, as cliche as this sounds, why do we not feel like we're enough? But that is really like the central question of human beings. As we've also mentioned many times, other sorts of beings don't have this sort of crisis going on with them. So we really need to unpack it and look at it because that sort of sets the stage for everything else that's to come when we talk about why we're at odds with our own selves. And again, that life that we encounter directly in a mundane day-to-day way. So that loss of direction can be attributed to potentially a number of things. Frequently, it starts with what a lot of folks have called this endless search for meaning. But something that I've been interested in unpacking is more about becoming itself. And what is it to become, actually? And so that is also something that throughout this work, we're going to continue to look at and get a better understanding of and about.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middletree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.